Good. Okay, so now we've got your attention. So welcome everyone to the afternoon session of the last day. My name is Lara Edwards. I'm a Programme Director at Health Data Research UK, which some of you probably have not heard of. We're quite new really to the clean air community, being very kindly invited here by Stephen and Noel. And our focus really is we're the nation's Health Data Institute. We're now in our second 5-year funding period, but we kind of really take a long-term 20-year perspective to kind of use health data and health-related data. So this is kind of when we're moving into environmental and health data linkage space to enable discoveries to improve people's lives, basically. So I'm here today just to introduce Professor Dave Topping, who's Professor of the Digital Environment at the Centre for Atmospheric Science at the University of Manchester. Dave works at the intersection of atmospheric science, numerical modelling, data analytics and stakeholder engagement. He's also a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute of AI, whose activities include using data science across a number of areas, but also creating platforms for community integration and knowledge exchange. That's all very impressive, but I did find out last night that he's actually met Star Wars R2-D2, and there is photographic evidence on his profile. But so I'll pass over to you, Dave.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, hi everyone. I'll just get this running. Yeah, so I seem to be developing a knack of writing talk titles that pose a question that I don't have an easy answer to, but hopefully this summarises where we're going. And I'm really coming at this from the lens of obviously someone actively involved in the research community, but also someone involved in infrastructure planning and also as an educator, because it's a fast-moving space. So I'd like to break down... Oh, I've also realised, before I carry on, I'm developing a history of memes to try and summarise talks in this space. So I thought it'd be interesting to present the timeline and obviously give you a carrot to try and stay, if you can, just to see where I've gone in 2024. But you'll see there's an important theme emerging from all of these. Okay, we've moved very much from talking about big data to actually the emergence of AI and how it's changing everything we do. But really I'm going to break this down into just briefly talking about AI and emerging narratives, some relevant use cases, I think, for what we're working on in this community. Moving on to talk about the importance of data, which sounds silly, but it's absolutely critical. And then try and summarise where I think we're going and where we need to invest more in the future. Well, you know, it's been around 14 years or so, I would say, that machine learning has started to infiltrate most scientific disciplines and offer a potential route around connecting end-to-end data products where traditional frameworks might otherwise suffer. Talking about traditional numerical models. We now know in environmental science more broadly, there's huge amounts of unstructured data out there, digitization of different systems, and so on and so forth. And AI, of course, takes that one step further. It starts moving us towards automated decision systems. What's absolutely true is that we're changing that connection between the natural world, human world, and the digital representation of those. Yeah, so a lot of our workflows are changing month by month at the moment. And often the public narrative focuses on AI. It's the exciting endpoint. But we also have to realise that we should be talking about data science. And I always like this figure because it illustrates that, of course, machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence is a subset of data science. And there are elements of the data science landscape around regulations, standards, and other things that really determine the effectiveness of everything that it encompasses. Okay, so that's a common theme throughout this talk. There's been a boom in open source tools, and I think that's one of the main drivers why we see adoption of machine learning in the research community. And when you actually use, ironically, AI tools to search through the literature on AI, air pollution and health, you'll see that there's a definite trend of increase in the number of publications by year, but also because the availability of the tools, it no longer sits within a single domain. Yeah, so you can see from this, I haven't done a deep dive, but you can see that there are certain categories where there are more publications in this space than others. ranging from engineering through to social sciences and economics, okay? So we're starting to really remove some of the silos that we would otherwise be working in, and AI is certainly contributing to that. The real boom in open source tools and availability of those tools is being pulled from the front end by what we call frontier developments. Okay, so we've all heard in the news about generative AI, ChatGPT and others. And every year there's something called the Gartner Hype Cycle, which some of you may have seen before, and this positions the state of a given technology. And if you just look at this diagram here, from the bottom left, you might have an idea or a trigger of innovation. A small number of people start working on that idea. As more and more people develop that technology, we start thinking it can solve all manner of different problems to the point where it reaches what's called the peak of inflated expectations. That's a Monday morning for me. And then eventually that technology enters the trough of delusionment. That's around Wednesday, I think, at the moment. But the important thing about this diagram is eventually a technology will reach a stable point. And this trough is really important because that trough allows us to realize what is actually possible with these tools. It was only last year that Gartner placed generative AI at the top of peak of inflated expectations. Within that 1 year, it's moving down. I don't know if you can see it with a pointer, moving down that trough now. And this is really important because as scientists, what's happening is, as more and more people are developing these tools, we're starting to realize what it can and can't do. The interesting thing behind this diagram are a lot of market forces as well. There's an article in The Economist last week that summarized that it cost about $100 million to train ChatGPT, and they reckon it will cost about $1 billion to train the next generation up. So what's happening is smaller versions of models with very specialized purposes are infiltrating the scene as well. So a lot is happening, but it's actually going to change what we do. Okay. The other thing that I'm particularly interested in, this is absolutely changing the relationship between the technology, academic, and policy world, because we now see the delivery of service products that potentially could absolutely remove a lot of admin burden, but equally start infiltrating scientific grade tools that policymakers might want to start adopting. Okay, and we'll come back to that shortly. In terms of the scientific literature, I would say in the space that we're in here in this conference, we see dominant use of machine learning applications, and this diagram, it breaks down the type of machine learning that we normally talk about on your, let me think about that, on your left-hand side. Unsupervised learning, when we give data to an algorithm, we don't hold its hand, we want the algorithm to pull out distinct groupings. So that will include things like source apportionment and outlier detection. On the right-hand side, we see supervised learning, where we hold the hand of the algorithm a little bit, we train it, we have data we know the answer to, and then it will start to predict results from larger data sets. In atmospheric science, at least, the combination of the two, semi-supervised approach, is gaining popularity. Often it's very expensive to generate lab data that you know the answer to, but you can take an unsupervised approach with lots of ambient data, let the algorithm learn the latent foundational knowledge that's in that data, and then pull your small amount of lab data in a supervised approach. That's a really popular method. The interesting thing is the bottom area, that's reinforcement learning, and you'll have heard of that in the news with an algorithm playing AlphaGo or playing the old Atari games. This is when an algorithm adapts to its digital environment and reaches an optimal outcome. That's starting to gain traction in the literature, less so in atmospheric science in a siloed area, but when you start looking at the interface of air quality and health, we see a number of examples that populate the left and the right. But in terms of reinforcement learning, there are studies in the literature now where people are demonstrating optimized building ventilation, for example, to improve the state of our air quality within that building. So as I said before, it's no longer sat within certain domains. There are engineering solutions being proposed in response. Okay. Normally as scientists, when we apply machine learning, there's a hell of a lot of data manipulation required. Excuse me. That is becoming automated. So this is as an example used in the atmospheric community called automated machine learning. It can be applied to weather normalization. It can be applied to combining satellite data products with ground products. The key thing is illustrated in the top right two workflow diagrams. Previous machine learning workflows require the expert to pre-process the data, train the model. The automated machine learning workflow, and this has been developed by Microsoft, Google, and others, takes that away from you. Okay, so the idea is you have the problem you want to solve, you collect the data, give it to AutoML, and it will give you the best model available. Okay, so automation is happening within the scientific community. Take that automated level one step further, and of course we start to look at these service provisions I've talked about. And when you start thinking around AI and automation, you naturally start thinking about the big technology vendors, the Microsoft, the Googles, and NVIDIA of this world, okay? And this was an example I came across very recently. I didn't know that it existed, but Google AI is being used in cities in the UK to optimize traffic signals to try and reduce emissions. I had no idea this was happening. And when we mentioned this to Transport for Greater Manchester, oh yeah, we're using that. So it's interesting when you start to see, again, talking about that relationship between the academic, policy, and technology world, this was an example where it was entirely responsive. There is no monitoring or evaluation in place. Some examples are strategic. Yeah, so you have partnerships between the likes of Microsoft, ECMWF, and others, and this was announced recently to predict air pollution across the world in a number of minutes. Okay, so accelerated model performance. Okay. And I'm sure as you're seeing all of this, you're thinking about, oh yeah, but, and we'll get to that shortly. Okay. And exactly this is the point of this slide. As I said before, it's data science, okay? It's not just AI and machine learning. Okay, so we need to start pulling this back a little bit and start thinking about what we do. One useful way of framing this was a couple of weeks ago, UNESCO released a summary of global approaches, so the taxonomy of AI regulatory approaches. And it's a fascinating read if you do have the time to have a look at it. But what I've drawn out from that is the comparison between the DCIT pro-innovation approach, which is still open for public consultation, and the EU AI Act. Okay? So what you have in this list is everything from completely flexible, principles-based approach, where a governing body will just give guidance, but there's no requirement to follow that guidance, all the way through to a liability approach. So if you adopt an AI-driven system and something goes wrong, there's liability around that. Typically, you see organizations and countries starting to pick and choose some of these. It's an interesting comparison between the UK and the EU's approach in this space, both following the approach of adapting existing laws, so relying on existing governing bodies to start thinking about this longer term. But the real debate in the media is about everything I'm sure you're thinking about now, okay? So you'll see a lot of bodies really challenging these approaches that do not take a rights-based approach. We know for sure that there are big digital divides in the UK. We've heard a lot about socioeconomic status and the impact that can have. The same the same is true with access to technologies. And there's a feeling that AI will make that even worse if we're not careful. When you look at the required regulatory instruments suggested to move towards that, we include access to data. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. So, this moves me on to a body of work that was funded from Natural Environment Research Council, but there's a wider UKRI movement to try and improve access to data. And the Digital Solutions Programme, which we're running out of Manchester with a range of partners, was the whole aim of that is to improve access to non-academic end users of all this 40 plus petabytes of environmental data held across 5 different data centres. So our approach was, okay, well we know there's a lot happening in the AI space, we know there's a lot of need to get hold of this data, we're going to go out and ask what people want before we design the technological stack. And that's quite a brave approach. We've seen a lot of UKRI, well, not just UKRI investments in building digital products that simply aren't used because they weren't designed with the end users in mind. So we travelled the country, we spoke to around 81 public sector organisations, we asked them what they want from environmental data, and 2 top priority use cases fell out. And that includes environment and health. People want to start understanding the impact of environmental stresses on public health. The other was housing, so Big challenge for the UK is being able to predict where we should build houses in 30, 40, 50 years' time under different climate change scenarios. So that was great. We thought, right, we have a rationale for building something to improve the access to the data. But whenever you build a digital platform, you really need to understand the barriers these end users face. And this was striking to us. When we spoke to all of these organisations, some had no idea who NERC were. They didn't know about environmental research in the UK, despite having interest in that. But the key thing that came out of this was barriers to data. And some of those are listed here. Too many sources out there. They can't access easily. They're working with outdated platforms. There's a lack of coherent data management infrastructure. So we need to then think through how do we make this easy from an access perspective. In terms of environment and health, what we can do at least is start to improve the connectivity between those two domains. So at the very start, we started speaking to HDI UK and others, where there's a movement to try and standardise what's called trusted research environments, or TREs, and these hold sensitive health data. And we've realised that we can start pipelining environmental data into those TREs using an OS product, what's called a UPRN. So this building has a UPRN, Unique Property Reference Number. Patient records are being tagged with UPRNs, environmental data can be tagged with UPRNs, okay? So we're starting to demonstrate what's possible in terms of data linkages. This short video is a demo of what the Digital Solutions Hub will look like for an end user. All of those dots are UPRNs in a section of Manchester, and the user can overlay different environmental products. So they'll click on a UPRN and see which environmental data is available. You'd think I would show an air quality layer for this conference. I mistakenly included noise, but it's the DEFRA noise data set. But also users can access this data programmatically. So we're speaking with the Christie at the moment and the UK Biobank, and through our environment and health use case, we're actually feeding through and tagging. So we will provide a UPRN tagging service for environmental data and pipeline that data in, to these TREs. That includes data funded through the Clean Air Programme, but also non-environmental data, socioeconomic data, green space and other things. Once we demonstrate the art of what's possible, those teams will then start running analytics to, for example, start looking at determinants of disease progression and cancer outcomes. So we're showing the art of what's possible, and that's fine. But of course, in this example, we've had access to that data. And the other thing I will say, so we're working with Esri, so this is built on, it's Arc GIS Enterprise, running on Azure, and there's a reason we're running on Azure. If anyone's interested, I can talk you through that. But by running it on Microsoft's platform, all of this data will be searchable by anyone with a Microsoft account. So this then opens up to billions of end users, okay, potentially. That is exciting but terrifying at the same stage. So we're moving along in terms of data requirements. But as I said before, a lot of this assumes that you can find the data, okay? I would love to hear from all of you how easy you think it is to find the data you're interested in. And one key example is climate data. It's not easy to find. There's been fantastic movements in open data initiatives over the last 10 years, but just because it's open does not mean it's automatically discoverable or useful, okay? So the interesting role of AI in this space is actually using AI products to search and discover data that already exists. I was at a public sector and AI conference a couple of months ago in Westminster, and it reminded me around the IoT boom, when all of these new sensors were being sold as solving all the problems that public sector organisations needed to solve. And AI products for search and discovery represent 90% of that at the moment. So in a project we're running with Liverpool, funded through ESRC, we're using OpenAI products to actually search for that data. So the idea is, rather than having to know a project acronym, you should be able to ask a question of a database. Okay? And in this example here, what I've taken a video of, because I'm not going to do a live demonstration of this, although it is open, I've just asked a question. I'm looking for data on air quality and public health. And this is tapping into the CDRC data center and giving me a list of data products that otherwise would be hard for me to find. Okay? Not only that, we can actually ask the AI, why is it pulled? Why do you think that's relevant to what I'm interested in? So the semantic understanding in these large language models is then being used to navigate what I would call an absolute mess of metadata standards that exists up to this point. Okay? So that's a really interesting direction of travel for me. And I think we're seeing the art of what's possible, and that's great. Because things are happening so quickly, it got me thinking about where are we at in terms of a generic AI strategy for the community in terms of air quality and health. And I've pulled out this diagram from the Harvard Data Science Review that was published a few years ago. And it's a set of recommendations that any organization or a community can take to actually build a sustainable way forward to actually enable an effective AI strategy. And I don't think we're even at stage 2. I think I was really surprised when we started building digital solutions how few people knew where air quality data sat or existed. I expected it to be much more widely known than it is now. And there are very good reasons for that. But for me, I think whilst the AI machine is moving forward and very, very quickly, there are very fundamental questions we need to ask. And part of that is related to our ambition. Where do we want this to go longer term? Things will continually be demonstrated, and that's great, but how do we enable some level of control over that? There needs to be a review of data assets. Okay? We need to look about the skill sets that community need to take this forward. But ultimately, it relies on organizational governance, leadership, and culture. You know, what are the roles and responsibilities? They are not well defined at the moment. It's all done in a very ad hoc way, and that's okay, because there's some fantastic science coming out of it. But if we want to take this forward in a sustainable way, we need to start forming groups to take control of this. So it is a perfect time to have this conference and the conversations that have been raised up to this point. So my summary is it's great. There's some really exciting things happening. We need to think about the cultural change needed to enable investment in the data assets that we have. We need to start bringing this together in a more sustainable way. Roles and responsibilities are not clear. You know, often we came across, this is not my problem. Metadata standards, sustainability of archives, replication, backup. Yeah, we talk about fair data a lot. In practice, it's not really happening. Okay? There is absolute benefit for working with partners in the technology sector. I'd sooner be in the same room than throwing bricks against the room that they're in. So there's a lot of appetite to really do more in the pollution and health space. They have the tool and skill sets required, so we need to think about what those effective partnerships will look like. And for me, I'd love to know what our ambition is, yeah, because that drives where we want to go and the investments we need. If there's a feeling that everything's okay, that's fine. But I don't think it necessarily is from a data perspective at the moment. Okay. But on a positive note, I'm sure you've all been waiting for the meme that I've come up with for this conference. And I think this summarizes where we've gone to in the space of 1 year. Okay? So data's still there, but AI leading us into AI is a pretty interesting time that we're living in. Okay? And just, I would say that a lot of the things that we've talked about has been summarized in a soon-to-be-released AQUEG report. So do keep your eyes open for that. Otherwise, I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.